Welcome to Use Case 2 on Compliance Management. In this use case, we will focus on the capabilities of ARIS process mining for auditing, both internal and external, and compliance handling. In this scenario, we'll take you on a journey on how ARIS supports and accelerates the main goals of auditing and compliance handling. 1, being in control of proper execution with your business processes, and 2, having a reality check from time to time if the defined and described processes and procedures still reflect reality or if they should be updated. Our starting point is the design model in ARIS, where we'll use the procure-to-pay process as our guiding process for this particular demo. If you're looking to engage in compliance handling, you'll need a reference model one way or another because, well, without it, what would you be comparing the execution data to? It's very convenient to have the reference process already at your fingertips before you start to mine the process for this particular use case. Now, in the P2P process, you can easily see that a risk has been identified for one step in the process, the create purchase requisition in this case, and that also mitigating controls have been built in the form of a business rule check. In this case, it's the review and approval of the purchase requisition. One of the things we'll be showing in this demo is how easy it is to query the execution data and run the business rule checks on it, so you can find out quickly and efficiently if your organization applies these controls in a structural manner or not. This process model contains much more information, of course, but it's not relevant for this particular demo. Now, based on the information in the process model, people in the organization will know what to do and how to do it to execute the process. On top of this, the auditing and compliance departments of the organization will want to know if the execution happens to be in line with the internal agreements, meaning if the processes and procedures are followed. One way of doing this is process mining, and our starting point for the demo is the fact we've successfully mined the supporting application in which the procure-to-pay process is executed. And let's be honest, this is very often an ERP system of sorts. Now, based on the connectivity capabilities of ARIS process mining, we have transferred the data from the ERP into our process mining engine, configured the mining project, and performed the necessary data transformations. I would encourage you to take a look at use case number 1 for more details on that specific functionality. The final step before we can start in the in-depth analysis is to identify a reference process for conformance checking and transfer this information into the process mining engine, which just takes a push of a button. Let's take a look at that model now. Now, here in the model, we have a conformance check button, which says transfer as a reference process to ARIS process mining. So we click that button. We select the project we're going to be using for it, and then we click on Transfer. Now what we're doing is bringing the reference model from the ARIS process repository, where we have all your business processes, into the ARIS process mining engine. The next thing we need to do is map the two data sets together. On one hand, you have the information coming from the reference model, which you'll see on the left-hand side in the table. On the right-hand side is all the things we discovered already from the data set. Remember, we already have the data set prepared as a starting point for this demo. Now, then you need to map them. One of the things you can do is the automatic mapping. It maps the steps through name matching. But sometimes there might be names that are slightly different in your reference model compared to your data set, and you can also manually add those mappings after you've done the automatic one. Then, of course, there are a couple of activities that stay unmapped because they're not in your reference model, and you can decide what you'd like to do with each of those activities. In this case, we're going to mark them as unwanted because we don't want change activities, for example. And the last one we're going to be disregarding as it's not relevant to this particular check. Now that we've completed the mapping, we simply activate the mapping. And after you activate the mapping, you'll need to recalculate your data sets. Once that's done, you've completed the setup of your ARIS model as a reference model for the process mining conformance checking. Now, let's go into the process mining project and start looking at the things we can learn from this. Here we see, in the Compliance tab, that the process mining distinguishes between compliance and conformance, and it allows our users to analyze both separately as well as combined. Compliance, in this case, is the product of conformance and a rules check. Now, a process is only compliant if both conformance and rules are observed. This is why we start with compliance at the top half of our dashboard, because that's kind of the first piece of information that we're looking for. In the lower half of the screen, the user can choose between the conformance details, the order rules, the check details, or both. If we scroll down, there's an additional metric called the fitness value. So, what is fitness? Let's talk about the difference here from conformance. Think of conformance kind of as binary, black or white, 1 or 0. It's either conformant or it's not conformant for a single execution. However, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of academic research into what we call the shades of gray in between. If a process execution is not conformant, it doesn't mean that it completely abandons the rules. It could still mean that it's almost the same as the reference model. It just deviates on 1 or 2 occasions in the process. And in order to give that level of nuance and granularity, Eris is the first commercial process mining solution in the market that incorporated the fitness value into the out-of-the-box capabilities of process mining. And because of this level of granularity, when it comes to determining the level of conformance, a process instant detail has been significantly increased. Now, what you can see in that bottom graph with the red and blue dots, if there's a blue dot with each of the variants, which are the unique pathways in the process that we've discovered, blue means completely conformant. Red means it's not conformant, but you can see in the height of the red dot, the higher it gets, the higher the fitness, so the closer it is to your reference model. There are 2 more analysis views that I think are worth showing, and once again, both are out of the box. The first one is all of your conformance issues. Now, you're evaluating your reference model. You'll also be able to find the different types of conformance issues, and that's important. We're going to take out the unwanted activities type of nonconformance because we don't want to focus on that in this particular demo. We'll just simply filter that out. Let's focus on things like incorrect or illegal start or end activities or sequencing issues. And in this particular analysis, what we see here, when we selected the first one, is the fact that the receive invoice should not be a start activity. And we can confirm that selection. Then when we go to the Process Explorer, well, it's already pre-filtered based exactly on these cases. So the cases where receive invoice is the first activity of the process. And when you start increasing the number of activities you want to show in your Process Explorers, we start to see that there are 3 different ways of dealing with this type of process step. So from the process invoice, there are 3 pathways, and the right-hand 2, one is send invoice back to the vendor and initiation of an approval workflow. I would argue they're legitimate workarounds, legitimate process outcomes. The one that we're interested in this case is when we go from process invoice to creation of the purchase order, because that's an interesting thing to focus on. And now we highlight that particular selection, we can use what's called the root cause miner to take a further look into this and see what's actually causing this behavior to happen. What elements in the dataset are the largest contributors to causing this particular sequence to happen? So there's an invoice first, and then we create a purchase order later. Let's investigate this a little bit further. So now we've selected the behavior, and we've run it through the root cause miner. We again want to filter out and look at certain things because we're not interested in specific variants or specific case statuses. We're interested in the more organizational dimensions of the data set. So where is this happening most of the time? Or why? Or what risk category? So if we look at this one thing we learn from running the root cause miner is that the unwanted behavior occurs more frequently in LATAM or APAC, so Latin America and the Asia Pacific region, than it does in EMEA or North America, so Europe, North America. That might be cause for further investigation. Now, the root cause miner can be executed multiple times on the same symptom while you sort of zero in on the actual root cause. And every time you run the root cause miner and select the potential root cause you're interested in, the root cause miner adds this as an additional filter. So in essence, the root cause miner helps you answer the 5 whys questions, which is well known from continuous improvement and the Six Sigma world. Now, based on our analysis, we learned that we have parts of the organizations that did not execute the P2P process the way it's expected. For the next part of the demo, we assume that one of the reasons is that these parts of the organizations either do not have a procurement process in place or are operating based on an outdated version. Either way, an update of this process or policy is required. This is where the seamless integration with Aris process modeling, where we started, comes in very handy, as the process to initiate updating the procurement policy is executed from Aris as well. In this case, straight from the reference process we saw earlier, you can submit a change request. This change request is part of a governance process that you can initiate and say, well, dear process owner, there is a change request based on the finding that we had in process mining, and can we please take a look at updating the policy for our LATAM and APAC friends when it comes to procurement? The next piece of functionality I'd like to show you, part of this demo, is the business rules check. We looked at conformance, but now we're looking at the business rules. And here, our process execution is checked against a number of predefined business rules. And if one or more rules are breached, they'll be included on the list in the process mining dashboard. So for this demo, we have one business rule implemented. It's called segregation of duty, or the 4 I's procurement policy, meaning that the user who's creating the requisition can never be the same as the user who is approving and reviewing the requisition. Oftentimes, that's controlled by things like user authorizations and roles, but somehow, sometimes, things might slip through. So for every process instance or every case, the process mining engine checks if the usernames for those 2 activities are different, and if not, they will be flagged as a check rule breach. You can see that here in the non-compliant cases, around 330 that we found in the entire data set. And by itself, it's already interesting to have insight into the results of these rule checks, but we've taken a couple of steps further. Imagine that based on the analysis of these rule checks, the organization concludes that it wants to trigger an action every time a rule is broken. And this can be a lot of types of actions, ranging from simple notifications all the way to the initiation of actions in other systems. For instance, you might want to create a ticket in ServiceNow or Jira, and those are all things that are possible. Instead of creating a restrictive library of predefined triggers in specific systems, Software AG decided on focusing on delivering the right information in what we call a webhook, which enables the organization to import and execute this webhook in whatever system they have, and that can deal with this. There are so many different systems and actions out there that the generic approach is the most effective one for this kind of feature, which we call insight to action. Now, because the Aris platform can deploy with a full-fledged risk and compliance module, we also developed functionality that enables organizations to automatically create incidents or issues in our risk and compliance platform called Risk and Compliance Manager. At the moment there's a breach of rules, and the organization has identified that it is risky enough and severe enough to act on it immediately, we have the opportunity to create an issue or an incident straight into Eris risk and compliance management directly from process mining. And then the whole formal risk mitigation process kicks off. So, summarizing, we can come to the conclusion together that the Eris process management platform is capable of defining, managing, mining, optimizing, and governing an organization's business processes, procedures, policies, risks, and control. This means fewer manual handoffs and transfers of data between different systems, and this reduces the likelihood of errors because of all those transfers. And this concludes our demo of the compliance, or use case 2, and thank you all for your attention.